Okay.
So hello to you, Dr. Aaron Balick, and thank you for coming to join me on a woodland walk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So I will introduce you to our community and also talk a bit about the tree for the month, which is the elder tree, and why we have invited you to talk about this theme because of the work you have done in the past, but also very recently, which has been very profound and important. And I really wanted to share it with our community because I think it can be incredibly helpful. So, um, Erin, you are a psychotherapist, and I know that
Yep.
also you work at the Centre for Psychoanalytic Studies in Essex, and that you are the founder of the Relational School as well.
A founder.
A founder of
Yeah.
the, well, very important, a founder of the
Hmm.
Relational School. But the thing that has really caught my attention the most is a recent article of yours, and I having done some research around this article, I can see that it links to an earlier book, which I think is so important right now. So the essay that you wrote was called "On the Failure to Understand the Psychology of Weaponized Reactivity." So we'll talk a little bit about that paper today, and also your previous book, "The Psychodynamics of Social Networking."
Yes. So that's a lot to cover in our short woodland walk.
Woodland walk. And in a way, it's
Yeah.
nice to have a woodland walk and be relaxed amongst the trees as we imagine for a topic like this, because it really relates to something that I think is, activates a lot of people. And there's been so much activation on social media recently because of events in the world. There are always events in the world, but it seems like I don't know why the Israel-Palestine conflict has seems to have brought a level of extreme kind of stress to many people because it's a very polarized conversation and it's extremely traumatic because of the intensity and the scale of
Yeah.
what's happening every day. So it feels like it's almost too much for many people to bear, and some people feel like they are completely overwhelmed with the grief of what's happening. But then there's this other layer, not only the grief, but then there's also the the way it enters into our lives in the format of social media, which is the way many of us engage with it. And you are here, our elder in understanding this theme, which I'm going to ask you a little bit about how you came to study this and how it came to be an important topic for you. But in fact, maybe I'll do that first, and then we'll talk about the elder tree and why that's relevant. So, your work on the psychodynamics of social networking. How did you come to this work? Why was it important for you?
So it's actually a really funny story that I'll try and keep very brief so we can get onto the other good stuff. But something did happen to me that provoked that story. So I was that book um way back, I think 2003, something like this. I don't know. It's just a jobbing psychotherapist. I was working from my home in Islington, North London. Um, one night I was up late. I was working in my consulting room and I heard this strange noise coming out of the corner of my room and thinking that there might be a loose mouse or something in the corner of my flat. I went to pull back some papers to discover what was there, and I found a 9-inch venomous South American centipede crawling up the side of my wall. Such a weird story, even though I've been telling it for years, right? So, what do? Right? You run to the kitchen, you get a Tupperware, you trap it, you make some holes in the Tupperware, and the next day you call the London Zoo, and the zoo puts you on to the Natural History Museum, and they say, bring your centipede down. I brought my centipede down, and it was, that they get lots of calls, and it's usually just people being hysterical about little English animals, right? This was the real deal. And the chief entomologist was just stunned that this thing was in my flat. The press secretary from the Natural History Museum came downstairs and asked me, I was so naive looking back now, but she said, could we put this as a story in, the newsletter for the Natural History Museum? And I said, yeah, of course you can. But she was a press secretary, right? So she sent it out as a press release that night. And the next day, it was the most emailed story in the world, according to Google. It was in newspapers all across the globe. Islington psychotherapist finds giant centipede in his flat. in languages all around the world. It was a stunning event, right? And this was like in the early days of Google. Anyway, some of my clients had like picked that up and were joking about it or a little bit cautious when they came to see me. And then it all went away. 6 months later, a client that I'd been seeing for quite a long period of time, who is in a state of distress late at night, Googled me seeking the familiar therapist that they knew so well to calm themselves, and instead found this story about this giant centipede and kind of freaked out a bit. Like I did. There's all this stuff about you I didn't know. All these people in the world know about it, and I didn't know about it. You were in danger. What would happen if something happened to you? Anyway, it provoked this massive thing. I was very unsupported because therapists weren't used to being discovered at that stage. You know, that was back in the day where you were more of a blank screen and people couldn't find out about you. And so I had to work it out myself pretty much. So I wrote my first clinical paper about being discovered on Google. It was called TMI and the Transference, LOL. Nobody even knew what TMI or LOL meant when I published. I thought it was such a great title. And, you know, and then off the back of that, I thought, okay, my client and I were able to work through the details of what happened through our sessions. It just occurred to me that on social media, on Facebook dominantly at the time, people are having what I came to call what did I call it? A virtual impingement. People were being impinged by each other all the time online, but didn't have the language or the understanding to work it out. So I wrote the psychodynamics of social networking, not for therapists working around social media, but as a way of applying psychodynamic psychology to social media so we could understand why we do it, what's going on there, what it does well, what it doesn't do so well, and just how to make sense of it psychologically. That's the long answer. That's the short, long answer to your question.
Oh, I love that story. It was so surprising at first when it involved a centipede. But it was a surprising beginning, but I think it's what an important experience for you. And it just made me think about how sometimes we have these intense experiences in our lives and they lead us to the great gift of our lives in a way, our great contribution, like sometimes
Changed my life, the centipede. Changed my
yeah.
life. Mm.
Thank you for all of us to the centipede. Who was obviously chose your desk for a reason because you were going to be
Yes.
able to take this work forward. And so the understanding of the psychodynamics of social networking, that's an interesting distinction. So it's really for everybody to understand our own behavior rather than necessarily for therapists dealing
Yes.
working with people. And so that leads me to your most recent article, which is on your website, and really found me in a moment when I was, extra thanks to that centipede, because it really found me in a moment where I was really struggling with what to do about the kind of social media. You talk a lot in this article, and it's called "On the Failure to Understand the Psychology of Weaponized Reactivity." And you talk in this article about this feeling of we should be posting something linked to this conflict, the Israel-Palestine conflict. But if it's not about this conflict, it's about another conflict. There's often some kind of polarized issue where we feel that we should be, that our silence is in some way supporting oppressors of different types.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sense of a kind of duty and obligation to have a kind of stance on social media, and that if you don't, you're allowing great wrongs to occur without standing up for people. So there's some sense around some kind of pressure of the need to make a statement. And so I was really so grateful for this article, which we'll talk about in much more detail, but really it's anyone who's also feeling the kind of stress of what to do about social media right now, or has read posts that has upset them, or has just found themselves with this kind of extreme stress response as a result of engaging with social media. I think reading your article is incredibly soothing and resourcing as well. And the psychodynamics theme runs through it. So one of the key ideas in your paper is around symbolic equation. So could you talk through the idea of some symbolic equation and how the meaning of this in the context of the current conflict?
Yeah. So the symbolic equation results out of a regression. So you kind of go back to an earlier state of development where things are where you keep things simple. Things are good and bad, black and white, that sort of thing. And what happens in a symbolic equation is that you take the symbol for being the real thing, right? So an example of this might be something like, it's probably a bad example, but somebody forgets your anniversary, right? So it's a symbolically important moment, but then you take that lapse to equal the person not caring about you, and this is over, right? You take a symbol for something. So in developmental work, it's about well, it's really about whether the breast is there to feed you milk or not, right? When the breast is there and when the breast isn't there. And this is why it's so regressive, because the theory comes from this idea that when you're a baby and you're hungry and you don't have the warm breast there to feed you, it's a nasty absent breast, right? It's not that it's just not there, it becomes this awful thing. And when it's there, it's the most ideal thing in the world. And the improvement from that is that when it's not there, you keep it as, you know, it's still there somewhere. It's just not with you at the moment. So that it has a constancy in your mind, right? And then when it's not there, you're not equal, making the symbol of it not being there equal to you being persecuted by a withholding breast. It sounds a bit crazy. It is a little bit crazy in a way, but it's a
Right.
condensation of meaning into one kind of symbolic thing. So what's happening today, in a sense, is the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, for example, is like a symbolic equation. So I don't like Jews because I stand with Palestine, right? And for a Jewish person, seeing the Palestinian flag or Free Palestine to them might be a symbolic equation to they want rid of me if they want a free Palestine, right? And generally, while there's some people obviously on either side of that coin, most people have a more nuanced point of view. But social media doesn't really mediate nuanced points of view, and that's the problem.
Yes. And so you talk a lot about how social media cultivates this kind of reactivity and in a way kind of thrives on this reactivity, and it's kind of what makes it's kind of the engine that drives it. Because probably if more people were this is just me thinking this now, you didn't say this, but if people were more reflective and pondering things, they probably wouldn't. There's always so much nuance that they might not post anything on social media because they realize that actually it's so nuanced that it needs kind of face-to-face discussion or action in the real world rather than a little line of a comment or something on some kind of nameless, you don't even really know who it's going to. It's this kind of nameless
Yes.
form. So if we were, but the reactivity is this sense of, you talk about, we like this feeling of being right. So in that moment, there's that reactivity that is appeased by the sense of, I'm saying this and therefore this makes me right, and it absolves my stress, my guilt, my despair, my fear by painting this thing across. And you
And also
talked.
gives you a little sense of control over something that you have no control over. So you get to say something about it. You get to make a gesture. And I always say, like, social media is gesticular, it's gestural. It doesn't really do anything for what's going on the ground over there, right? But it does something for us. And those are the questions we need to be asking. Why would I engage? What do I expect from that's what provoked that paper. I didn't engage for a long time, and then I decided to engage and got hit back, and then I thought, okay, what the hell is this all about? Why do we do this?
Yes, and I'd love to go into that in a bit more detail if you're happy to, because you mentioned in your article a post by the UN secretary, and this was responding to the events of October the 7th, and it was so interesting, the kind of backlash to it, because it seemed like a post that was about understanding nuance and context. Could you talk through a little bit about that post? Because I thought that really, in a way, that post and the reaction to it just really spoke to me as, yes, this is like, there is such tension that understanding is like, I feel a great anxiety about understanding, kind of losing understanding, and that there is this kind of upswell of condemning understanding, almost, that like understanding's not allowed. Could you tell us about that post?
Yeah. So after resisting posting for a long time, in my acknowledgement of what Twitter can do, this is a Twitter post. When I do post, I really think it through. really think it through. So the Secretary General of the UN, in a quite nuanced speech, where he acknowledged the pain of what was going on in Israel, and then said, and this didn't happen in a vacuum, and we need to understand what provoked Hamas to do this, got pilloried for deigning to understand why this happened, right? Now I'll talk about what I think is the psychology behind that. So in a minute, but so in response to that, just not being able to hold my peace any longer, I tweeted something like, it's we shouldn't be condemning people for seeking to understand. Understanding is not justifying, something like that. And immediately there was this barrage of, so you justify Hamas, and it's like, it's literally in the tweet, and this kind of, and then somebody else said, we don't try and understand serial killers. And I thought, I mean, go to the library. That's like, yes, we do try to understand serial killers. We don't try to. And then someone else said something like, terrorism has no context. So almost the more of this I got, I thought, okay, so there's actually kind of a willfulness here. There's a willfulness to make my statement a binary statement, to make me into an apologist for Hamas, which was so clear from that's why it was so curious to me. Why did I put myself in that position? Why is it just being willfully misused? Some people did pitch in and say, clearly he's not saying this, and, retweeted the tweet, all sorts of stuff. But I thought, yeah, people are actually killing the will to understand. Yeah. We try to understand serial killers so that we can try and stop people from serial killing, right? We try to understand terrorism to stop terrorism. And the context for what happened on October 7th is plain and 70 years old. And that doesn't mean it's an excuse for what happened, but to willfully misunderstand is to ask for it to continue.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And you mentioned about the kind of the psychology of why people, like, why do you think people are killing the understanding? What is it with, why are people, I've been observing it a little bit, and I think there are probably times in my own life where I have been maybe more prone than I am now to a kind of slightly polarized view, and being in my echo chamber and posting on social media about it. What's your sense of the psychology of it? Why do you think people that are taking that very kind of like non-nuanced position, because there is kind of always nuance, right? But why do you think people are taking that? What's the psychology of that position?
It's essentially defensive, right? So you are defending yourself from the possibility of being impacted by the nuance. And you asked at the beginning of the interview, you said, I wonder what it is about this situation. And I kind of think I have an answer for that, right? That in a very identitarian culture that conveys identity through social media, all kinds of identities that people are becoming more and more attached to. And in a culture that in many ways positively is responding more openly than ever to the consequences of colonialism and white supremacy and racism and the rich world versus the poor world, all of that kind of stuff. Everybody's very activated about that kind of thing. And then you have a situation that's based at the very center of Judeo-Christian Muslim society, right? That hinges on colonialism, race, religion, the haves and the have-nots, right? So the people that are deeply connected to that personally through their relationship to Israel or Palestine or Islam or Judaism or whatever those inroads are naturally going to be activated, just as you'd be more activated if you were Slavic or Ukrainian to what was going on in Ukraine. Yeah, that's going to be activating. But it's also going to activate all the people who are quite righteously and rationally angry about our post-colonial world and the inequities of it. So that can then be used to process that fury, which is difficult because it's a righteous fury. It's a real problem. It's injustice. What's happening is a direct reflection of that, I think. And it's about the individual who is experiencing or identifying with injustice, either as an oppressor or as the oppressed. So it's like if you could throw all of the hot button issues for 2023 into one place,
yes,
that's where you're going to find it. And that's where you found it for decades and decades. Well, that centuries, really.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Thank you for that way of understanding it. Really does make sense. It really resonates too. And so what can we do? Because I suppose if we know that actually, well, firstly, I guess the question is, does social media posting actually accomplish anything good? Can it? Because it can come from, as you say, this kind of really important recognition of injustice and want the impulse to do something. It's like, I can't just sit here and know that this is going on. I feel completely powerless to change this. I'm not a politician. Even if I was a politician, I probably wouldn't be able to affect it. It feels like this kind of the system is so not what most of us would want it to be, and the consequences of that are so extreme. And because of social media, we see images from it more and more. So we have this very understandable and important reaction against injustice. And it's a very complex injustice because there's injustice on both sides. And people feel that they want to do something. Firstly, do you feel like social media posting can achieve anything good? And the second question to that would be, if we don't do social media posting, or we do something like you did, which I thought was lovely, which was make a post saying, I haven't responded to this. I haven't responded to the conflict on social media. Please do not take my silence as meaning that I do not care. I care very deeply. I just choose not to. Social media isn't the kind of platform for me to talk about this. I thought that was lovely. And actually that soothed me so much because I thought, oh, that's such a good way of responding. But so yeah, so the two questions. Firstly, can it that kind of maybe noble impulse to do something, to help, to stand with others, to protest, to do something, can that important impulse for justice be served well by social media? And if not, how can we, as in many ways very disempowered citizens, how can we do something positive that fills that need?
So I think we really have to ask ourselves. So I think it can do. I think on balance, it's less good than it is good in a lot of ways. I might want to revise that. We have to ask ourselves what our motivations are. And I notice that my motivation, not in that thoughtful, I'm not going to post at the moment, but every time I wanted to post, I wanted to vent anger or frustration at what I was seeing, usually around symbolic equation, right? So it wasn't so much, I have clear thoughts about the actual thing that's on the ground, which I'm just not going to engage with on social media, but I could comment on how that's being talked about. So for me, it was just, okay, is this going to do any good if I just vent with everybody else and then everybody's venting? And I don't think that's particularly good. On the other hand, you said this thing about noble motivation, right? And I think at the bottom of it, there is a noble motivation, right? We should be furious and enraged at the kind of injustices that are going on and at what's happening. And it's good. It's good that we are. Yeah. Expressing it that way isn't going to solve it. For most of us, I mean, I follow a guy on Instagram who had the very bad luck of being prisoner. He's an Arab. He was imprisoned by the IDF and by Hamas. So he has a point of view which doesn't love either of them, right? And shares very balanced first-person perspectives on what's going on. Very clear position, but it's like, I'm going to trust this guy's, I don't know him, but I'm going to trust him more than somebody in, I don't know, Salford who just learned about it on TikTok and has an opinion, right? So I think you have to choose who you follow, and you have to choose your intention. I think his intentions are right. It is really to educate. But you got people who are trying to educate, and then you've got loads of propaganda, you've got loads of bullshit, and you've got loads of everything else to. So I think you really have to say, well, what is my motivation in posting? What is my motivation in looking? And to give you a good example and to share a little bit personally, when I come from a Jewish background, but I have quite strong anti-Zionist views, which don't sit in particular harmony with my extended family. So I also don't share stuff on social media because I know it will be hurtful to my extended family, and that's about what it would accomplish, right? Then what's her name? I'm glad I've forgotten her name at the moment. The Home Secretary said this thing about it. Suella Braverman. Yes.
Cruella.
So yes. So when she said this thing about hate marches and that Jews were scared to go into central London, I thought, like, no, I really want to go see for myself. And I had been tempted to go on the marches for several weeks, but I had family members here almost every weekend, and it wouldn't be a good plan. And I went, and I wanted to go as a Jewish person, even though I'm an atheist and I don't, I'm Jewish by accident, I say, yeah, but it's still part of my identity. So I made a sign that said another Jewish person standing with Palestine. And I stood waiting for a friend to join me on this march. And I was greeted with so much camaraderie and love and solidarity. People came up to me over and over and over again to share their appreciation for my being there. We're asking questions. There was dialogue. I had never felt more moved and optimistic than I did at that march. And I felt these marches are important. And for people to see those marches is important. To make a gesture on social media isn't. Yeah. And to have those conversations, because for me, it's not equally both sides, right? I think for me, there's a very difficult conversation to be had, particularly from where I'm coming from. Yeah. Which is very, very difficult. Like if I can't have it with close family members, how are you going to have it on Twitter, right? So it really has to be done. If you're going to really shift people's ideas, I would have retrospectively liked to have brought some family members there to see that it wasn't about hate and that there can be some kind of understanding that people do need to link up. And that just really reinforced for me, like, that's where it's at. That's really where it's at.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful and encouraging. And yeah, I'm hoping to go to the march on Saturday, and I'm really, really looking forward to being there, because I felt the same impulse. And around also, you mentioned in your article on your website about how with emails that we send off versus face-to-face interaction, with an email you just ping it off and you're responding to the voice in your head, and you're also responding to prior belief systems and other people in your lives that may remind you, that this person that you're emailing may remind you of this very complex personal history in your own head that you're responding to when you send off an email or make a comment on social media. Whereas when you engage with real life people, like you're there on the street corner with your sign and you see other people and they see you, I mean, in that situation, you were all kind of agreeing. But even if there had been people walking along that were in disagreement with you, being able to see your smile and your care and your humanity just discharges that level of kind of like the desire to kill understanding. And
yes,
to nurture understanding, because the fear we have is kind of deactivated by seeing a kind looking human face. So maybe one of the reasons why that march, that being in marches is so much more important, is that even in a march most people have they're standing on the same side, but it's also that we get to see each other's faces, and that we're such a social generation, and we're, after COVID, we've existed so much on these Zoom screens like we are doing now, but that we need to come back to each other. And actually that brings me to the elder tree, because we're in December, it's the month in ASA of the elder tree. And the elder tree, I mean, it's the simplest tree to describe, because it is exactly what the name is. It's about eldership. And I was thinking about how in the past, in kind of smaller local societies before industrialized modernism, where we would have been in smaller groups and we would have had elders, the local people who were older, experienced, and who'd been chosen because they were able to hold nuance. They'd been through many situations. People would go to them because they had conflicts or difficulties, and they would be able to stand for peace because they know they'd seen enough conflict to know the importance of peace and to understand a bit about how to come to that. And so there's something about age and experience and being able to look up to those people that hold that position, and the importance of having them influence us. And you know, I imagine this kind of like fireside, and if you were having a difficulty or there was a trouble in the community, you could go to that person and say, you know, what do you think, and sit down and take the time and person to person talk about it. So really having the influence of the elders on how we feel. And now we have the influence of the youngers, because social media is this kind of, in a way, quite, you know, you talk about symbolic equation as we revert into a much younger time, perhaps even infantile, with the good breast, bad breast. And the binary nature of the internet is very much kind of good breast, bad breast place. And so our influence, our social sphere is suddenly dominated by the influence of this very young, very rigid, very black and white way of thinking. So I think, yeah, the elder tree, up until now, we focus very much on, because the meaning of these trees evolves as we go through them each year, but has been very much around wisdom and around how we can be elders ourselves. But I hadn't yet thought about the elder tree in the context of something that is different, a space inside us, or a space that we create together that is very different to the younger of the social media world. So maybe the marches, can you think of any other ways that we can create these kind of spaces for wisdom and reflection and nuance to kind of almost regulate our own nervous system so that we can find the understanding rather than kill the understanding?
Yes. So what we lack on social media is interpersonal complexity, right? So when we're face to face with someone, the reason why most of the time, some of the time it happens, but most of the time we don't want to pummel them immediately, is because they're conveying something to us that's relationally complex, right? So they're saying something that we don't agree with, but they're saying it in a calm voice, or they're agreeing with something that we say or something that we don't agree with. Yeah. Or you missed the nuance, and so there's like all of these protective factors that stop you from beating each other up in more ideal circumstances, right? When it's an avatar on Twitter who you don't know, and it's a statement, and they're like an object, you can pummel them, you can dismiss them, you can block them. It's much easier. So we now have a generation that's grown up less practiced, I think, in interpersonal complexity. This is why people get ghosted, because they don't even know how to say thanks anyway, I'm not interested, because it's going to hurt somebody's feelings, right? That's the nature of things. Like, we're going to hurt people's feelings and they're going to hurt ours. We need to practice that again. And it doesn't have to be a big, marches scare me about it. I don't like big groups of people. And that was a big one, but like, it just has to happen on a one-to-one more. Yeah. And it was funny. I mean, the march is a good example because I did see stuff I didn't like. I did see hate and anti-Semitism. I saw a little bit, not a ton, right? But I also saw the cover of the Sunday Times that weekend, which took pictures of the worst of it, right? So it looked like everybody's holding up, Jewish conspiracy flags, and then, they were there, but they were a minority, like a diminishing minority of things that were there. Yeah. And that's also and there's a motivation for doing that. It's political motivation with the Sunday Times, for one. There's a financial motivation when it comes to social media. Highlight what activates people. So it's gonna show you that stuff. You're gonna see the more activating, horrific stuff, and you're gonna see less of the moderate voices, less of the quiet voices. So you're not even getting a very realistic view of how people are feeling.
Mm.
So you really have to make important decisions about if you're going to engage and how you're going to engage. You chose to engage in the paper that I wrote, which is a longer form engagement with what's going on, right? So you can go onto Twitter and say, come see my longer form, more nuanced perspective on what's happening here. But it is captivating. It's awful, but it's also captivating. It addicts us. So we really have to take control of that, because they want us to be passive to it.
Yes. And actually, two things came to mind about that. One is you said something very important there, that the financial motivation from social media for for the rage to be expressed. And that's very interesting, because often I don't really think about that, because it's free. It's kind of like we go onto Facebook or Twitter or whatever for free, but this is paying. People are profiting from our rallies of aggression.
Yeah, you see more ads. You if people are angry and they're there. And Elon Musk was bragging just 3 weeks ago, because he's so ripped the heart out of Twitter and destroyed it. But he said, it's been our busiest month ever. It's like, yeah, I wonder why that
Yeah,
is. It's
yeah,
really dark in a sense.
yes. And that made me think as well about it's this interesting thing you said earlier about someone that you do follow who has been held captive by the IDF and also Hamas, and this very interesting perspective. And it made me think about how we kind of see this as a kind of war of this side and that side, but that actually so often the kind of different extreme aggressive parties have more in common than everybody else. So we see them as absolutely kind of opposing and very different. And that this extreme force of kind of totalitarian belief versus this extreme force of totalitarian belief, but actually it's kind of all of us against totalitarian belief and extreme aggression and violence.
Yes.
Because actually, when we think as well about like how on social media we don't see each other's faces, that how actually I wish there was a place where we could sit down and where Muslim people, Jewish people, people with links to Palestine, people with links to Israel could sit together in a non-activated state and share their stories of grief and humanity and their desire for peace and their desire for everyone to be free and their desire for everyone to be not at risk and not threatened and not and that we are all united by our shared belief. If we are not a psychopath, we are united by our shared wish that all humans are respected and free and safe, and that everyone is allowed to live a life that is of safety. And that is just like a basic fundamental human principle if you don't have kind of psychopathic tendencies. And that the people on either side that are leading this, a very small number of people have those psychopathic tendencies. So in a way, also maybe to some of the people that are profiting from this kind of social media barrage. So maybe one of the things we can do against that force is, rather than seeing it as a battle of this side or that side, but that as we can kind of, our strongest resistance to the real problem is a very small number of people who are kind of have these kind of, I guess, psychopathic tendencies, or like kind of destructive, or just a lack of empathy, an extreme lack of empathy. But that maybe our strongest resistance is to recognize and remember that like 99% of people are empathic, good human beings that want the flourishing of everybody else as well.
I think that's right. And we have to remember that, as in Twitter, in the real world, like the loudest voices are the ones that get heard. They're not representative. And one of the great tragedies of October 7th is how many peaceniks were taken as hostages who have devoted their lives to creating peace. And I think I've heard some interviews with some who've come out, who would continue doing so, right? And it's tragic in the sense, because when you get your symbolic equation, the symbolic equation on the Hamas side is, they're settler colonialists, they deserve it, right? And that's why you see a lack of empathy for Israel's loss. When you get into the nuance, those actual people are not Netanyahu's. They've been fighting their whole lives against that government for a solution, right? And when we forget that, we forget the whole cohesion of what's underneath what happened, right?
Mm. And that's a beautiful, beautiful reminder. In a way, kind of encapsulates everything we've been talking about. And thank you so much. But before we finish our conversation, I just wanted to ask you quickly about another project that you're working on, which maybe is kind of linked to this in a way. It's certainly linked to eldership, that's for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about Time to Show Up?
Yes. So my colleague Natalie Nahai and I are launching a new podcast and community in January. We had you as one of our wonderful guests that we're going to be releasing first. And the idea of this is to create a community of people who will support each other to understand what their deepest values are and incorporate them into their professional lives to help them make choices about how they move forward. So people who are maybe getting a bit burnt out or maybe feeling a little bit stuck where they are or feel like there's a risk they're not quite ready to take. We interview a bunch of people, yourself included, to find out what their stories were to find their way to where they got to and the continuing challenges there, as well as people who are, we kind of give kind of coaching, they're called deep inquiry interviews to people who are on the verge of some kind of change. And then we draw out practices and theories and models to help the listeners activate that change in their own life. And there will be an online community where there'll be more resources and events to help people do that.
Oh, so beautiful. I think that's going to be amazing. Where can people find that and how, yeah, when's it launching?
So the website should go live hopefully in a couple of days' time, and it's timetoshow.org. You can follow my Twitter. I'll certainly be talking about it a lot. I'm at Dr. Aaron B. I don't know Natalie's offhand, but I'll certainly share it with you. But timetoshow.org is where you'll find most of the information. We'll have a YouTube page and a podcast as well. So look out for us.
Amazing. So timetoshow.org. And then the name of the article we've been talking about, again, just in case anyone missed it, on the failure to understand the psychology of weaponized reactivity. Is there any other, and in your book, The Psychodynamics of Social Networking, although that was from a few years ago, do you think you'll revise the book now after so many years?
Yes, I'm actually I'm late. I'm supposed to be doing that right now. So come the new year, I'd like to get it out in 2024 because it's a 10-year anniversary actually. So I'm working feverishly. I shall be working feverishly on that after the new year when my resolutions kick in. And I've also got a very small book called The Little Book of Calm, which is a self-help book, which might be helpful for people who are just, completely, burnt to a crisp after this year. Just very small, very short suggestions about how to bring calm back into your life.
Oh, thank you so much, Aaron. You have definitely brought a lot of calm to me over the last few weeks, and I hope everyone in our community will really enjoy reading your article and just listening to this and remembering that there is a different way of doing things, and it's about being together rather than pinging off
Yes,
something to the ether, looking at each other's faces.
absolutely. And woodland walks, real woodland walks.
And woodland walks, yes. Woodland
Yes.
walks like this, or real, yeah, absolutely. My gosh, the trees can really help. I had a lot of walks this last month, this last few weeks to really, yeah, take it to the trees when I didn't really know what else to do. And I suppose there is something about that deep groundedness, and that they are very silent and they do not say very much, but they stand for what they believe in still. So we can kind of make like
Yes.
the trees, keep our root connections with each other, stand tall in the direction of our values, but not have to speak it all the time. And
Yes.
to remember as well that in that silent, I mean, one final comment around, because the thing that always kind of remains with me is this slight sense of guilt, and that in my silence, I am in some way kind of allowing bad things to happen. Is there some mantra that we can give for ourselves or for others, that something to kind of like that there's this a saying that gets put around so often, which is kind of like, bad things happen when good people stand by and do nothing. Is there some kind of idea or some kind of mantra? I feel like I need to like download something so that when that comes into my head and I feel like I need to do something, it's like it's almost like that doing something on social media is not really doing anything. It makes it feel like it's not. Yes, bad things happen when good people stand by and do nothing, but also bad things happen, and can you think of a good reformulation of it?
Well, I would say bad. It's not. Yeah, it's not bad things happen when good people don't tweet about it, right? So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's an important one to bear in mind, right?
Yes.
Tweeting it isn't doing something. Well, it's
Yeah.
doing something, right? Making a gesture is making a gesture.
Mm.
And if you, and I think the adage is right. So I think one should do something.
Mm.
So do the thing. And if you get attacked for not making a statement about it, you'll know what you did. And the fact that it's not on Twitter and it's not a gesture is really the other person's
Yeah.
problem. Yeah.
So we do something that helps us feel that we are standing for what we believe in, but it doesn't have to be advertised to the world, and we don't have to.
Absolutely. You can even go to the march and not put it on Twitter.
Yes.
You know, you can donate to the Red Cross and not put it on Twitter. You can have a
Yeah.
conversation with another real person to educate yourself about something you don't. There's a ton of things you can do that
Mm-hmm.
aren't gestures.
Yes. And I saw something today actually that's kind of linked. I just kind of could find the name of it. It's a Facebook page that is about sending, I'll see if I can find it quickly. It's about sending greetings cards to people you don't know. So when I was having that sense of kind of like, all the destruction and conflict in the world. But then, we're busy, we have our jobs, we have everything else going on. There's this Facebook page, I'll put it up on when we post this, where you can sign up quite easily, and you can send just one or you can send more than one. And you send a greetings card to somebody that you don't know who signed up to receive them because for whatever reason they feel that they want to
Mm-hmm.
receive that. Might be people that don't have such a big network of people, so they feel that they want to receive that support and care, they're feeling isolated. And you can just send a card to someone you've never met before saying, you know their name, you know their address, dear somebody. Send them lots of care and support, knowing that they can open that card and smile. And it's, in a way, it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like a gesture of, well, it's more than a gesture, it's an action of connection and kindness in direct response to the kind of impulse of division and polarity and separation,
Mm-hmm.
disconnection. So that's the kind of thing. It doesn't do anything for people that are going through that conflict there at all. But in a way, neither do our social media posts. It doesn't have any actual
Yes,
impact
you
on
you
what's happening
can't,
there.
but you can be kind in many more moments across a day. You can spread feelings of warmth and kindness. You can regulate somebody down who's in a state of reactivity by taking them on a walk or listening to them and putting the phones away. There's tons of small things we can do that are much more effective than contributing to that noise.
Oh, thank you so much, Aaron. I've enjoyed the conversation so much. It's
I
given
really
me.
enjoyed it too. Thank you for inviting me in to the
Oh,
inviting me out for the walk.
breaking you out. Thank you. And I
Yes,
hope we can go on another woodland walk another time in the
I
future
would
as
look
well.
forward to that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Let me just stop the recording.